He stared at the bank door, the glass sign reflecting a reversed world. The closed sign glowed back at him, a final, unyielding verdict. In his hand, the lease agreement felt both like a lifeline and a death sentence. The ink was dry, the paper crisp. He'd signed it only an hour ago, but the moment he'd put pen to paper, the world had shifted. Across the street, his uncle Jareth and his cousin Oswin were getting into Jareth's brand new pickup truck, laughing, their faces lit up by the setting sun. They looked like victors. They looked like they had just won the biggest prize in the world. They had no idea what he had just done. He gripped the document, his knuckles white. Let them laugh. They thought they'd won. They had no idea what I was about to do. He yelled. The wind had a bite to it, the kind that got in your bones and stayed there. I watched it whip through the dead corn stalks, each one a testament to another season of scraped-by living. The farm was 100 acres of ghosts. My grandfather's spirit was in the fields, my father's in the rusted-out tractor, and now mine in the creaky floorboards of the farmhouse. Maribel was inside, humming a quiet tune as she mended a shirt. We didn't talk much about the future anymore. There wasn't a future to talk about. The present was a tight fist around our throats, and the past was a weight that kept us from moving. The tractor hadn't run in 3 months, and the barn roof was more hole than tin. I told myself I could fix it, but I knew I couldn't. The money wasn't there, and the energy was running thin. My father had promised me this place. He'd looked me in the eye when I was a boy and said, "Lyle, this farm will be yours." It was a promise built on faith and love, a thing so strong it felt like a law of nature. But he'd died before he could make it a legal reality, and the farm, with all its debts and history, fell to my uncle Jareth. A family handshake didn't mean much when the deed said a different name. Jareth always let us lease it, year to year, a kind of cruel charity. He never raised the rent, never asked for much, but he never let go of the control either. It was a silent power he held over us, a quiet reminder that our home wasn't really ours. My father's will was a simple affair, everything to my mother, and then to me when she passed. But the will never mentioned the land. It was my grandfather's land, and he had made a legal pact with his children. The land would be passed down to Jareth, the eldest son, a quiet decision that left my father in a state of resentment. Jareth, a cold and calculated man, had moved to the city, made his own money, and came back to the rural town to purchase a brand new home. He wanted to do things his way, away from the dust and dirt of the farm. He didn't want the farm, he just wanted the power it held. The resentment between my father and Jareth was a palpable thing, a shadow that stretched across the fields and into our lives. My father, in his final days, had called me to his bedside and told me about a secret deal he made with Jareth. A deal he said would ensure the farm was always mine. He never elaborated, and I never asked. I trusted him. I trusted the promise, a promise that felt like a lie now, with Jareth holding the deed and me barely holding on. The winter was coming, and with it the cold bite of the end of the year. The lease was up in 3 weeks. Jareth hadn't said a word about it. He never did until the last minute, a twisted game he liked to play. I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in colors of a beautiful dying day. It was a reflection of my life. My father's promise was all I had. It was a faded memory, a forgotten truth. My hands were calloused and my back was bent, but it was all for this farm, for this promise. But with every day that passed, the promise felt more like a cage and less like a home. I had to talk to Jareth. I had to know. The silence was louder than a storm. Maribel was standing in the kitchen, a gentle smile on her face, the way she always looked when she was thinking of good things. She turned the radio on, a Christmas tune filling the quiet house, and the warmth of the song made the cold outside feel a little less fierce. She'd been talking about Christmas plans for weeks, trying to put a little joy back into our world. "Lyle," she said, her voice soft, "we should invite them. It's been too long." I knew who she meant. Jareth and Trina. His wife was a kind woman. Quiet, the sort of person who saw things but never said a word about them. I always felt like she knew something, but I didn't know what it was. I hesitated. "Maribel, you know how it is with Jareth." She walked over and put her hand on my arm. Her touch was warm and steady. "He's family, Lyle. It's Christmas. It's a time to let go of things." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that Jareth would finally let go of the bitterness. We'd always sent him a Christmas card, but we hadn't seen them in years. Jareth was a busy man, a man of business, not of farming. He was a man of the city, not of the land. I agreed. We wrote the invitation together. It was a simple card, one with a photo of the farm in the summer, the fields green and full. We sent it off, and I tried to push the dread away. We had a little savings left, enough to get the tractor fixed maybe, but not enough to last through the winter. The lease was our only hope. If he renewed it, we could get a loan, get through the winter, and start over in the spring. I put my faith in the unspoken understanding that had existed between us for decades, that Jareth, for all his coldness, would not take the farm from us. It was a blind faith, a desperate hope. A week passed, and then another. The Christmas decorations went up around town. The trees were lit, and the sound of carols filled the air. My dread grew with every passing day. I watched the mailbox, hoping for a reply, a sign, anything. And then a small envelope arrived, Jareth's handwriting. It was a simple card, no Christmas photo, no note, just a message written on a small square of paper. Christmas is for family. We'll see about the lease when the time comes. I wasn't expecting you to invite us this year. My heart stopped. He wasn't expecting me to invite him. The phrase hung in the air like a storm cloud. What did it mean? Had he already made a decision? Was he planning to not renew the lease? The silence was worse than a shouted threat. My son Boone arrived for a short visit that weekend. He'd left the farm years ago for a better life in the city. He saw the state of the place, the sadness in my eyes, and he sat me down on the porch. "Dad," he said, his voice full of worry, "it's not worth it. Let it go. Sell it. You're killing yourself for a broken promise." I shook my head. He didn't understand. It wasn't just a promise. It was my legacy. It was my father's legacy. It was our home. But Boone was right. The farm was a weight on my shoulders. I had to know what Jareth meant. I had to know before I lost everything. Before Christmas. The drive to Jareth's house was a short one, but it felt like a trip to another world. The roads were smoother. The houses were bigger, and the yards were perfectly manicured. The fences were white and without a single splinter. The farm was miles away from this kind of world. My truck, a rusted old Ford, felt out of place. I parked it in the long driveway, a stark contrast to Jareth's sleek black sedan and his son Oswin's sporty new car. The air was colder here, the silence deeper. Jareth opened the door, a polite smile on his face. He was dressed in a clean starched shirt, his hands soft and without a single smudge of dirt. "Lyle," he said, his voice without a hint of warmth. He let me inside, and the house was beautiful. Clean lines, modern art on the walls, and a large fireplace that filled the room with a silent heat. No family photos, no old heirlooms, nothing that spoke of a history shared, just a cold, empty beauty. Jareth offered me coffee. I sat on a perfect white couch, a thing that felt too expensive to sit on. I got straight to the point. "Jareth, I need to know about the lease." He took a sip of his coffee. He didn't flinch, didn't show a hint of emotion. "Lyle, I'm not sure I can do it this year." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? But you always renew it." "Things change," he said simply. He walked over to the window, looking out at his pristine lawn. "Oswin has finished his business degree. He has some big plans. He wants to start a land development company. He thinks our land has some serious potential. He didn't say your farm. He said our land." The words were like a knife twisted in my gut. He was going to sell it. He was going to sell my home to his son. My home. My father's home. I felt a wave of dizziness. I gripped the arm of the couch. "Jareth, please. We need this farm. This is our life." He looked at me, a flicker of something in his eyes. Not pity, not empathy, but something else, something cold and calculating. "Lyle, a family has to look out for its own. And with a new business venture on the horizon, we have to do what's best for the family." My hands were shaking. I got up from the couch. "The lease is up in a few weeks. What am I supposed to do?" He looked at me with a slight shrug. "I'm sure you'll figure something out, Lyle. The land is valuable. You can always start over somewhere else." The words felt like a death sentence. He was going to take the farm. There was nothing I could do about it. The unkept promise, the quiet betrayal, it was all coming to a head. I left without a word, the polished floor and silent heat feeling like a trap. I drove back to my own world, a broken man, Ibethican, I didn't tell Maribel. Not all of it. I told her Jareth was still thinking about it, that he hadn't made a final decision. I couldn't bear to see the hope drain from her eyes. I couldn't bear to see her face when she realized we had nothing left. The fear of losing the farm was a cold, constant companion. It was in the wind that howled through the cracks in the walls, in the silence of the broken tractor, in the way my hands shook when I picked up a tool. It was a physical ache in my chest, a heaviness I couldn't shake. I spent the next few days in a daze, working in the barn, trying to fix the tractor, trying to outrun the truth. I was an old man and I was tired. I was tired of fighting, tired of hoping. I was tired of living on someone else's good graces. One afternoon, looking for an old wrench, I stumbled upon a dusty old box tucked away in a corner of the barn. It was my father's. I hadn't looked in it since he passed away. I pulled it out, coughing as the dust flew up into the air. Inside were old photographs, faded newspaper clippings, and a worn leather-bound journal. I sat down on a hay bale, the smell of dust and old wood filling my senses. The journal was thin and looked like it had been carried around for years. The pages were yellowed and brittle. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was my father's, a familiar scrawl that brought a pang of pain to my chest. He wrote about the farm, about the weather, about his struggles with money. Then I saw a name, Cassius, an old business associate I remembered him mentioning once. My father wrote about a business deal gone wrong, about a debt he owed, about a promise he made to repay. The entries were not daily, but they were detailed. He wrote about how the debt was a constant shadow, a thing that kept him awake at night. He mentioned Jareth. He wrote about a fallout, a heated argument over a business deal that had gone south. Jareth, my father wrote, felt he had been cheated, that he had lost a lot of money because of my father's poor judgment. The resentment I'd always sensed between them wasn't just about the farm. It was about money. It was about a deep-seated feeling of betrayal that went back decades. My father's words felt like a key, a secret I had unknowingly been carrying. This was the real reason Jareth had a hold on me. This wasn't just about the farm. It was about my father's ghosts. My father had written of the debt, of the arguments, of the shame. He had written of the promise he made to Jareth to make it right. But the journal never said what that promise was. It never said how he made it right. I felt a surge of hope, a desperate, drowning hope. Maybe there was something in this journal, some clue, some secret that could save us. My father had left me a puzzle, a map to a treasure I didn't know existed. The journal became my life. Every night after Maribel was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table, a small lamp illuminating the pages, and I read. I read about my father's shame, about his desperation, about the silent war he waged with Jareth. He wrote about a secret deal, a way to make things right. He wrote about a hidden stash of cash and a letter. He was going to use it to settle his debt with Cassius, to get a clean slate, to give me the farm without any secrets hanging over our heads. The entries were cryptic, but they were there. My father had left a trail of breadcrumbs for me. He had written about a secret location, a place only he knew about. He wrote about it in a code, a series of numbers and letters that made no sense to me. I spent the next few days trying to decipher it. The fear was still there, but it was a different kind of fear now. It was a fear of running out of time. Christmas was less than 2 weeks away, and the lease was still in Jareth's hands. I felt like I was in a race, not just against time, but against my own family, against Jareth and Oswin. I didn't know what the secret was, but I knew it was big. I knew it was the key to everything. I felt a surge of energy, a new purpose. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a detective. I was a son, trying to find his father's truth. I went back to the old photos, the newspaper clippings. I looked for a clue, for a hint. The photos were from the 70s. My father and my mother, young and full of hope. He was standing in front of an old silo, a thing that was long gone now. I saw a small detail in the photo. A piece of wood was sticking out from the side of the silo, a thing that looked out of place. It was a detail so small I almost missed it. My heart pounded in my chest. I went back to the journal. The numbers. Could they be coordinates? Could they be a date? I went back to the photo, my hands shaking. The numbers matched the date on the back of the photo. He had written it down. The date, the time, the place. He had hidden it in plain sight. I felt a rush of adrenaline. He wanted me to find it. He wanted me to know. He wanted me to have a chance. I realized the secret wasn't just about the money. It was about my father's love for me. It was about his attempt to right his wrongs. I went to the old barn, the place where the silo had once stood. It was just a patch of grass now, nothing but a memory. but I knew where it was. I walked to the spot. My father's journal had a final entry, a single line: "The old man's secrets are buried deep. The key is in the place where the corn meets the sky." The ground was frozen solid, hard as stone. I grabbed a shovel from the barn, my hands numb with the cold, but I didn't feel it. I felt only a frantic, desperate energy. I dug at the spot where the silo once stood, a small, quiet act of desperation. The earth was stubborn, and the shovel scraped against the frozen ground, making a harsh, unyielding sound. My breath plumed in the cold air, and I felt a sense of urgency, a feeling that if I didn't find it now, I never would. The old journal had said the key was in the place where the corn meets the sky. It was a poetic way of saying it, but I knew what it meant. The silo, the tallest point in the field. After what felt like hours, the shovel hit something, a hollow thud. I dropped to my knees, scraping the frozen dirt away with my numb fingers. It was a metal lockbox, small and rusted, but sealed tight. I felt a rush of triumph. I had found it. I had found my father's secret. I took the lockbox back to the house, my heart pounding in my chest. Maribel was watching a Christmas movie, but I couldn't focus on it. I set the box on the kitchen table and looked at it, the rust and old paint speaking of a long-buried past. I had to find a way to open it. I went to my tool shed and came back with a pair of pliers and a screwdriver. I worked on the box, the metal groaning under the pressure. Finally, with a loud snap, the lock gave way. I opened the box. It was not filled with money. There was no stack of cash, no neatly wrapped bundles. It was a single, neatly folded document, wrapped in an old piece of cloth, and a single letter. I picked up the document. It was a deed to the small parcel of land that my grandfather had sold to a land developer decades ago. I remembered hearing about it. The developer went bankrupt and the sale was never completed. I looked at the deed. It was not in my grandfather's name. It was in my father's name, and it was signed over, not to the developer, but to Jareth. My mind raced. This wasn't a sale. It was a collateral. My father had used the land as collateral for a loan from Jareth's family. But for what? The land developer had gone bankrupt, and the deed was worthless. My father had given Jareth a useless deed in exchange for a loan. I was confused. This wasn't a solution. This was a deeper betrayal. My father had lied to Jareth. He had given him something worthless. The letter was a different story. It was from my father to Jareth. It was written in a formal, stiff tone. It spoke of a debt, a business deal, and a promise to pay. He had given Jareth the deed as a gesture of faith, a way to show him he would repay the loan. My father had been holding on to a worthless piece of paper, a reminder of his own failure. This wasn't the key to saving the farm. It was a bigger secret, a more painful one. The land wasn't worth anything. It had no value. The only value it held was in the story it told, a story of betrayal and broken promises. I had found a family secret, but it was not the one I was looking for. I sat at the kitchen table, the deed and the letter spread out before me, the silence in the room punctuated by the tick-tock of the old clock. My father's words echoed in my head. He had given Jareth something worthless as collateral. Why? What was he trying to prove? I read the letter again. It spoke of a promise to make things right. But the letter didn't say how. It didn't say when. It was a promise of a future that never came. I felt a wave of anger. My father had put me in this position. He had left me to deal with his ghosts, his mistakes. He had left me to fight a battle I didn't even know I was in. I felt a sense of hopelessness, a feeling that I was trapped in a web of secrets and lies. This deed was no leverage. It was just a piece of paper. It had no power. It had no value. But then I thought about Jareth. Why had he been so guarded about the lease? Why had he been so vague? If he had been planning to sell the farm all along, why hadn't he just told me? Why had he played this cruel game? It didn't make sense. I looked at the deed again. It was signed and it was dated. It was a legally binding document, even if the land was worthless. I had an idea. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. I would use the deed. I would use it as leverage. I didn't know how. I didn't know what I would say, but I knew I couldn't just give up. I couldn't just let him take the farm. I had to fight. For my father, for Maribel, for me. I felt a new kind of purpose, a new kind of energy. This wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. It was about taking back what was ours. But I was torn. This was a low blow. This was not a move of a loving family member. This was a move of a desperate man. I was acting out of fear, not out of love. I was playing a game of chicken with my own family. I looked at the deed, the signature of my father, and I felt a pang of guilt. Was this what he wanted? Did he want me to use his mistakes as a weapon? I didn't know. I didn't know the man he was anymore. He was a ghost, a series of memories and a series of mistakes. I had to decide. Do I tell Maribel? Do I tell her the truth, the full truth? Do I tell her that her father had left a trail of lies, a series of unfulfilled promises? I didn't know if she could handle it. She was already so fragile, so tired. The stress of the farm, of the money, of the future, it was all weighing on her. I looked at her, asleep in the other room, her face peaceful and calm. I couldn't do it. I couldn't put this burden on her. I would do it alone. I would fight this battle alone. And if I lost, I would tell her everything. I would tell her that I tried. Maribel knew. She knew something was wrong. She saw the way I looked at the door, the way I flinched every time the phone rang. She saw the exhaustion in my eyes, the slump in my shoulders. She sat me down one evening, her face a mask of concern. "Lyle," she said, her voice gentle, "you can't do this alone. Whatever it is, you have to tell me. We're in this together." I looked at her, at the deep worry in her eyes, and I couldn't lie anymore. I couldn't keep this secret from her. I told her everything. I told her about Jareth, about the lease, about the search, about the journal. I told her about the deed and the letter. I told her that our only hope was a worthless piece of paper. She didn't say a word. She just listened, her face growing pale with every word. When I was finished, she was silent. I waited for her to yell at me, to cry, to tell me that I had made a terrible mistake. But she didn't. She walked over to the old cedar chest in the corner of the room. She opened it and pulled out a small tin box. My grandmother's tin box, filled with old buttons and needles. I looked at her, confused. She opened the box. Inside was not a collection of buttons, but a stack of bills. A small, neat stack of 20s and 50s. I looked at her, my mouth agape. "Maribel," I said, my voice a whisper. "What is this?" She looked at me, a soft, sad smile on her face. "It's for the barn roof, Lyle. And the tractor. And a rainy day. It's what I've been saving from the egg money. I was too scared to tell you. I was scared you would think I didn't trust you. But I do. I had a feeling. I felt a pang of guilt. She had been saving, scraping, putting away every spare penny, while I had been in a fog of desperation. She had been a constant source of strength, and I had been too blind to see it. The money wasn't enough to buy the farm, not even close. But it was enough to show me that she believed in me. It was enough to give me a new sense of hope. It was enough to show me that I wasn't fighting this battle alone. Her secret was not one of betrayal, but one of love and faith. I sat down and held the money in my hand. It was cold and crisp, a testament to her strength. Her small secret felt like a mountain of hope. I had a piece of a puzzle, a worthless deed. She had a piece, a small stack of bills. Together we had a chance. We had a chance to fight. We had a chance to save the farm. I felt a surge of energy, a new determination. I was no longer a lone wolf. I was part of a team. She was my rock, my anchor. I looked at her, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice firm. I knew we would. With her by my side, I knew we could face anything. But the deed was still a secret, a heavy burden that I had to carry. I had to use it, and I had to use it wisely. The day was overcast, a cold gray that seeped into my bones. The air was thick with the scent of an impending snowstorm. It was the day before Christmas, and I had one last chance. I went to the bank. I had to know if the deed was truly worthless. I had to know if Jareth was hiding something. The bank teller, Cal, was a friend from high school. He was a good man, a man of numbers, not of secrets. I walked up to his desk, my hands in my pockets, the deed folded neatly inside a manila envelope. "Cal," I said, my voice low, "I need a favor." He looked at me, a worried expression on his face. He knew me well enough to know something was wrong. "Lyle, what's up?" I pulled out the envelope and slid the deed across the table. "Can you look into this, the parcel of land? I need to know the history of it. Who owns it now? Who's been paying the taxes? Everything." He picked up the deed, his eyes scanning the old faded paper. He looked at me, confused. This deed is old. The land was sold to a developer years ago. I remember hearing about it. He took the deed and went to a back room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I looked out the window at the snow beginning to fall. I felt a pang of fear. What if the deed was worthless? What if my father had truly left me with nothing? I gripped the chair, my knuckles white. Cal came back after what felt like an eternity. He sat down and looked at me, a bewildered expression on his face. "Lyle," he said, his voice a whisper. "This is a strange one. The bank's records show the deed was signed over to Jareth's family decades ago, as collateral for a loan that was never repaid. But there is a twist. The land developer went bankrupt, and the land was never transferred to him. Jareth never claimed the deed, but he's been paying the taxes on it every year. For decades. Without fail." My heart stopped. He had been paying the taxes. He had been paying the taxes on a piece of land he didn't own. A piece of land that was legally in my father's name, and then signed over to Jareth, but never legally transferred. It didn't make sense. Why would he do that? He was not a man to waste money. He was not a man to pay for something he didn't own. Not for this long. There was something more going on. Something bigger. Something my father had left out of his journal. Jareth had a secret, a bigger one than my father's. He had been carrying this burden, this debt, for years. It wasn't about the money. It was about something else entirely. Cal looked at me, a confused expression on his face. "Lyle, I've never seen anything like this. It's like Jareth is trying to keep the land, but he can't. It's a ghost of a debt." I didn't say a word. I took the deed from him, thanked him, and walked out of the bank, the snow falling softly on my face. The cold no longer felt so bitter. I had a weapon. I had the truth. And I was going to use it. I drove home, the snow picking up, covering the world in a blanket of white. I couldn't stop thinking about what Cal had said. Jareth had been paying the taxes on a ghost of a debt, a piece of land he didn't own. It didn't make sense. It was a riddle I couldn't solve. I got home and Maribel was in the kitchen, humming a tune as she made dinner. I didn't tell her. Not yet. I had to think. I had to plan. I had to confront Jareth. But not on the phone, not on his turf. I had to confront him where it mattered. I had to do it on Christmas. The words from his card echoed in my head. "I wasn't expecting you to invite us." He had been waiting for me to come to him, waiting for me to make the first move, and I was going to do it. I called him. His voice was guarded. "Lyle, what is it?" "Jareth," I said, my voice calm. "I'm coming over. We need to talk. About the lease, and the old business." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. He didn't say a word. I knew he was rattled. I knew he was scared. I hung up the phone and looked at Maribel. "Maribel," I said, my voice firm. "We're going to Jareth's house for Christmas dinner." Her eyes widened. "But Lyle," I thought. "I know," I said, "but it's time. It's time to end this." I saw the fear in her eyes, but she didn't argue. She just nodded, her eyes full of a new resolve. I packed the deed and the letter into a small briefcase. I was ready. I was going to face my family and I was going to find the truth. The drive to Jareth's house was a silent one. The snow was falling heavily now. The world was white and silent. I felt a sense of calm. I had a plan. I had a weapon. I had the truth. We arrived and Jareth was waiting for us at the door. He didn't smile. He just nodded and let us in. His wife Trina gave me a look of pity, a look I couldn't understand. She looked at me like she knew something I didn't. Oswin was there too, sitting on the couch, his face a mask of indifference. He didn't even look up when we walked in. He was waiting for the show to begin. I sat down and the silence in the room was heavy. I looked at Jareth. His face was a mask of control, but I saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Fear. He was afraid. He was afraid of what I had found. He was afraid of the truth. I knew I had the upper hand. The Christmas dinner was a tense affair. The food was good, but no one was talking. The silence was louder than a storm. I looked at Maribel. She was quiet, her face a mask of worry. She knew what I was about to do. She knew this was a high-stakes game. After dinner I stood up. "Jareth," I said, my voice calm. "Can we talk?" He nodded, and we walked into his study. The room was all mahogany and leather, filled with books and trophies. He sat behind his large desk, a king on his throne. I took the briefcase and placed it on the desk. I unzipped it and pulled out the deed. I laid it on the desk, the faded paper a stark contrast to the polished wood. He looked at it, his eyes wide with surprise. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice a whisper. "It was in my father's lockbox," I said, my voice firm. "I found it, and I went to the bank. I know you've been paying the taxes on this land for decades. I know you've been hiding something." He looked at me, his face a mix of shock and fear. The king was dethroned. The mask of control was gone. He looked at me, a man I didn't know. He took a deep breath. He leaned back in his chair. He looked at the deed and then at me. "My brother," he said, his voice a whisper. "He was the land developer. He was a good man, but he was a terrible businessman. He got into a deal with Cassius, a bad one. He was in deep debt. My father knew about it, and he couldn't let his own son fail. He made a deal with Cassius. He would give him the land, in exchange for wiping the debt clean. But my father didn't own the land. Your father did. Your father had signed it over to him years ago as collateral, a debt that was never repaid. My father, in his desperation, used the deed to save his own son. He knew your father wouldn't say a word. He knew he would keep the secret. He was wrong. Your father found out, and he was furious." I was stunned. This was a deeper betrayal, a secret that went back generations. My father's shame, my uncle's shame. It was a ghost that haunted them both. Jareth looked at me, his eyes full of pain. He had been carrying this burden for years. He had been paying the taxes, not out of greed, but out of shame. He had been trying to keep the land in the family, even though it was a worthless piece of paper. He had been trying to atone for his father's sins. I felt a surge of pity for him. He was not a villain. He was a man who had been trapped by his family's secrets. Jareth's story poured out of him, a flood of decades-old pain. His brother, his hero, had died not long after the disastrous land deal, a heart that had been too weak to bear the shame and failure. Jareth, in his grief, had taken over the debt, promising his father he would keep the secret, that no one would ever know the truth. He had been paying the taxes on the land to keep it from being sold, from being a public record of his family's shame. He had been holding on to the deed, not as a weapon, but as a monument to his brother's failure and his father's desperation. He had kept it a secret from everyone, even Trina, his wife, who had no idea of the heavy burden he carried. He had been a silent guardian of a family's shame, a man who had sacrificed his own peace for the sake of a dead brother. I sat there stunned, my mind reeling. My father's journal had a different story. It had painted Jareth as a cold, calculating man who had cheated my father out of a business deal. But the truth was more complicated. My father had used Jareth's desperation, his love for his brother, as a way to get out of his own debt. He had made a promise to Jareth, a promise to keep the secret, if Jareth would forgive his debt. My father's promise had been a lie. He had used Jareth's shame as leverage. He had been the villain, not Jareth. Jareth had kept his end of the bargain. He had forgiven the debt, and he had kept the secret, but he had been left with the consequences, the burden of a worthless piece of paper and a legacy of shame. And then there was Oswin. He had no idea. He had been raised with the idea that the land was a valuable asset, a thing to be developed, a thing to be sold. He was a victim of Jareth's secret, a victim of his father's shame. Jareth had been trying to find a way to let go of the debt, a way to be free, but he couldn't. He was trapped in a web of his own making. I looked at the deed, the faded signatures of my father and Jareth's father, a testament to a long-ago betrayal. The Christmas card from Jareth now made sense. "I wasn't expecting you to invite us." He had been waiting for me to ask about the lease. He had been waiting for me to come to him. He was trying to give me a chance, a way to save the farm, without having to expose his family's shame. He was trying to do the right thing, in a way only he knew how. He was a man of quiet burdens, a man of silent sacrifices. He was not the man I thought he was. He was a man who had been carrying a family secret for years, a man who had been trying to atone for a sin that wasn't even his. The air in the study was thick with unspoken truths. Jareth sat slumped in his chair, the weight of his confession visibly pressing on him. He had laid out his soul, the secrets he had carried for decades, and he looked smaller, weaker. The king was no longer on his throne. He was just a man, broken by the past. He looked at me, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Lyle," he said, his voice raw, I have to ask you to keep this to yourself. For my brother's sake, for my family's sake. I didn't say a word, I just looked at the deed. It was not a weapon, it was a tool of understanding. It was a way to heal a decades-old wound. I had come here to fight, I had come here to win. But now the victory felt hollow. It felt like a defeat for us both. I had come to take something from him, but he had given me something far more valuable, the truth. I looked at him and I saw a man who had been trapped. He had been a silent guardian of a secret that had been eating him alive. He had been trying to find a way out, a way to be free. He had been trying to do the right thing, in his own, convoluted way. I looked at the deed, and I knew what I had to do. I couldn't use it against him. I couldn't use his shame as a weapon. I couldn't be the man who took everything from him. I had to be the man my father should have been. The man who forgave, the man who healed. I looked at him and I felt a sense of peace. The battle was over. The war was over. I had to make a choice. A choice to walk away from the past. A choice to embrace a new future. I had to be the man who broke the cycle of betrayal and shame. The Christmas dinner was a blur. The food was cold, the wine was flat, and the conversation was non-existent. I sat there thinking about everything, about my father's lies, about Jareth's shame, about the burden they both carried. I looked at Maribel, and I saw the love and faith in her eyes. She had given me a choice, she had given me a way to fight, and now I was going to use that strength to do something else, something better, something that would heal, not hurt. I had a choice to take the farm, to win the battle, to be a victor, or a choice to be a better man, a man who forgave, a man who healed. The next morning, I stood on the porch of Jareth's pristine home, the snow still falling, the world a hushed white. He was standing there with me, a new lease in his hand. It was for the farm, and it was permanent. He had transferred the deed to me. He had given me the farm. He had given me the one thing I had been fighting for, the one thing I had been dreaming of my whole life. He had given me everything. I looked at the deed, and I felt a sense of relief, a sense of peace. The ghost of my father's promise was gone. The weight of Jareth's shame was gone. The farm was finally mine, but the victory felt different now. It was not a win over a rival. It was a gift from a humbled man. He looked at me, his eyes full of a quiet apology. "Lyle," he said, his voice a whisper, "I am so sorry. I should have told you. I should have been honest with you. I was trapped by my own pride, by my own shame. I should have let you go. I should have been a better man." I looked at him, and I saw a man who had been through a lot, a man who had been carrying a burden for years, a man who had finally found the courage to let go. I didn't say a word. I just looked at the deed. It was not a victory. It was a testament to a family's buried pain. I looked at the deed, and I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just take it. I couldn't just walk away. I looked at him, and I said the words that had been on my mind for a long time. The Christmas card now felt like a message, a secret code between us. He hadn't been expecting an invitation, because he had been expecting me to fight for the farm. He had been waiting for me to take control of my own destiny. He had been waiting for me to be the man my father should have been. I had a choice. I could take the farm, and in doing so, I would be taking a piece of his soul, or I could give it back. I looked at the deed, and I thought about Maribel, about the family we had built, about the future we had. I had a choice. I was no longer a victim. I was a man who chose his own destiny. I stood on the porch, a permanent lease in my hand, and looked at Jareth. The snow had stopped falling, and the world was quiet, a perfect white canvas. The moment felt like the one from the bank, the one where I had the cancelled lease in my hand. But the feeling was different. There was no bitterness, no anger, no shame. There was only peace. I looked at the deed, the signature of Jareth, a testament to his surrender, to his love for his family. He had given me everything. He had given me the farm, and he had given me the truth. He had given me a chance to be free, but I couldn't take it. I couldn't be a winner in this game. I took the deed, and I tore it in half. Jareth looked at me, his face a mix of shock and confusion. What are you doing?" he asked, his voice a whisper. I looked at him, and I said the words that had been in my heart for a long time. "This farm is for family, Jareth. It's for both of us." I walked over to him, and I handed him the two halves of the deed. "I don't want it," I said. "I want you. I want my family back." His face was a mask of disbelief. He looked at the deed in his hand, a worthless piece of paper, and then he looked at me. His eyes were full of tears. He had been carrying the weight of his family's shame for decades, and in that moment he was free. He was free to be a man, a brother, a father. He was free to be himself. I walked away from his house, the snow crunching under my feet. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. The unburdening felt like a weight had been lifted from my soul. I was free. I was free to be a man, a husband, a father. I had lost the farm, but I had gained my family. The land was not a prize to be won. It was a wound to be healed, and I had done it. I had done the one thing my father couldn't. I had broken the cycle of betrayal and shame. I walked back to my own home, the rust on the truck and the broken barn roof not a symbol of my failure, but a symbol of my freedom. I walked in the door and Maribel was there, her face a mask of worry. I looked at her and I smiled. "It's over," I said, my voice a whisper, and she knew that I had not only saved our family, but I had healed a wound that had been festering for decades. I had cancelled the farm lease, not out of malice, but out of a new understanding, a new love and a new peace. I was a man who had lost everything, but in doing so, had found everything.